Hi, this is Morley, and this is the M-Wire. Happy Saturday morning, folks. I hope you're having a good weekend thus far. Thank you for all the comments you've been leaving. I greatly appreciate them. As I said yesterday, it gives me an opportunity to compare my thoughts with yours, saying nothing of the fact that it helps propel the video in the algorithm. So I greatly appreciate that, and do keep them coming. But on to the business at hand, Kazakhstan. So as you can see from the headline of this article from the Washington Post, things have somewhat subsided in Kazakhstan, and that doesn't really come as any surprise. When you authorize the use of lethal force, people are going to think twice and even thrice about protesting because it becomes very apparent to them that they could very well lose their life doing so. So that's when reality sets in, and people start thinking, is this such a good idea? And that's exactly why the president of Kazakhstan, obviously with Vladimir Putin's blessing, chose to use deadly force to get this under control as quickly as possible. And also, it's definitely a psychological tactic in terms of Ukraine, as it sends a very strong message that the Russian Federation is not playing around here, sending a very strong message to the world and of course Ukraine that Russia isn't playing around here, and they will immediately use deadly force if the situation calls for it. Now one has to wonder if Russia itself orchestrated this protest in Ukraine in some way. Now I certainly can't prove that, folks, but we are talking about Vladimir Putin here, who is not only a former KGB agent, he is the former head of the KGB itself, so obviously psychological warfare is a big part of Mr. Putin's game. So going back to all the troops that Russia has on the border with Ukraine, this upcoming week is going to be very, very telling into what actually transpires with this situation. Because there's two very high-level meetings coming up. I'm going to present to you an article in just a bit here that details that. But there's two very high-level meetings between the US, NATO, the EU, and Russia coming up. Now, as you know, Vladimir Putin has already had two meetings with Biden, and as you can see, nothing has really come of them. Both of them have basically reiterated their stance, which is diametrically opposing at this point. Russia wants no eastern expansion of NATO in Eastern Europe. Biden has said that, well, you know what, that's really not up to me, but basically has stressed that NATO can expand anywhere they want, and they don't really need Mr. Putin's permission, to which Mr. Putin does not agree whatsoever. Now, it's my opinion that these meetings are essentially a pretext to war. I really don't think that anything is going to come of them simply because of the two diametrically opposed stances that these leaders between Putin and the West have. Now, I'm going to get into this article out of Zero Hedge that essentially talks about the sanctions that the UK and the US and probably a lot of EU members are going to put on Russia should they decide to invade Ukraine. Now, Vladimir Putin has said outright that if the West or the EU or anybody sanctions Russia over anything, that essentially severs all ties with the West. Now, in terms of diplomacy and diplomatic relations, saying that is basically flipping the West the bird, as it were, if I may be a little bit crude. It sends a very strong message that we are no longer friends anymore, which can only mean that we are enemies, which means we are essentially back to Cold War era Russia. Like it or not, the diplomatic relations have dilapidated so badly that that's essentially where Russia and the rest of the West anyway is at. So let's get into this brief article from Zero Hedge and find out the particulars as to what Liz Truss, who is the British foreign minister, has to say in regards to sanctions and Russia. On Thursday, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss warned Russia that the UK is working on high-impact sanctions Western powers could implement over allegations that Moscow is plotting to invade Ukraine. We will not accept the campaign Russia is waging to subvert its democratic neighbors, Truss told Parliament, as reported in Reuters. They have falsely cast Ukraine as a threat to justify their aggressive stance. Now let's be real here, folks. Basically, both sides are gaslighting each other. There's a lot of propaganda coming out with this. So it is true that Russia did essentially take the Crimea without even so much as firing a shot. So it could be said, as of, 8 years ago now, Russia did take some very provocative measures against Ukraine. They essentially took their land and said, so what are you going to do about it? And, well, Ukraine, knowing full well that their military isn't any match for Russia's, just kind of had to accept it, if you know what I mean. The UK is working with our partners on these sanctions, including high-impact measures targeting the Russian financial sector and individuals, Truss added. For their part, the Russians have strongly denied the claim that they are planning to invade Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin is concerned with the increased US and NATO presence in the region and is seeking security guarantees that NATO won't expand further eastward. Truss insists that Russia is the aggressor and that NATO has always been a defensive alliance. Although since the Soviet Union collapse, NATO has waged wars of aggression in the Balkans and across the Middle East and North Africa. Truss' language on sanctions echoes what is coming out of Washington. The U.S. has warned Moscow of severe sanctions that would aim to isolate Russia from the global financial system. In a call with President Biden last week, Putin said such sanctions could lead to the end of U.S.-Russia relations. On Friday, Truss and other NATO foreign ministers will hold virtual talks on Ukraine ahead of planned meetings with Russia. On January 10th, U.S. and Russian officials will meet in Geneva to discuss Moscow's concerns. On January 12th, NATO will hold a meeting with Russian officials in Brussels. Now, as you can see, folks, next week is going to be a very big week, and this is essentially going to tell the tale as to how each side is going to proceed. Vladimir Putin's patience is wearing thin. He's not just going to keep going to meeting after meeting after meeting if these meetings don't bear any fruit. And as you can see, both sides have drawn their stance as to what they want from the other going forward. I get a very strong sense that this whole situation here is meeting critical mass, if you will, one way or the other. We're going to know very soon as to what happens diplomatically between the West and Russia. It's not going to be a long, drawn-out process, so we watch and we wait to see what these two sides can agree on, if anything. Now, I'm going to make a video later today, folks. I've got some things I have to do during the day today, but I'm going to make a video about 5 places in the world where World War III could start. Be sure to tune in for that. But thank you so much for coming along with me to my update. Thank you so much again for the comments, folks. I love reading them. Like I say, it gives me an opportunity to compare my thoughts with yours. But thank you so much. Please remember to like, to comment, as I said, and of course to subscribe if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate it. And until that next update, God bless and have a great day.